Welcome back to Iacon, everyone. So this video is to give my impressions of Season 1 of the Transformers as a whole. If you haven't seen them and you want my thoughts on the individual episodes, check out my playlist, linked below or in the corner right there. So my feelings of Season 1 are rather mixed. One thing I've noticed during my time posting these episodes is how defensive Gen X kids are of their favorite shows growing up. They'll gladly talk smack about the terrible television kids these days are watching, while not even allowing the discussion on the flaws of their beloved Transformers. But let's face it, it's a flawed show, and you are allowed to love it despite that, or not love it because of that. I love many imperfect pieces of art, whether music or cinema. I love Star Wars The Phantom Menace, because of where my life was at the time and how it made me feel in the moment. But of course, in retrospect, I see its flaws and I acknowledge them, but that doesn't change the love I have for that movie. I love U2's album Pop, a deeply imperfect work that the band never felt satisfied with, and I can clearly see a greater potential than what was given in the final product. But damn, I just can't stop listening to it, and part of that comes from its imperfections. The album fascinates me in what it hopes to accomplish, and I wonder if it achieved what it wanted to be if I would have that same fascination. Both these works are made from extremely talented people who have made stronger, more celebrated works in the past. And the shortcomings of these works are a reflection of many things. No doubt time and money being a big part of it. But also because despite talent, perfection often escapes us. And sorry kids, perfection definitely escapes Transformers G1. All that being said, the series so far works despite itself. It is better than the sum of its parts. Despite the fact that I actually rated many of these episodes as being subpar or even really poor, the season actually leaves me feeling rather positive about the series. Part of that comes from the sense of continuity. Many of these episodes are directly linked or build off each other. You can see a clear through line from episode to episode, and for the most part, you should watch them in order, otherwise you will be bogged down with the characters that you've never seen before and you'll just land in the middle of a story. But these stories are also self-contained enough that you don't need to see them in order to understand the episodes individually. But I respect that serialized approach, especially for the time when even most shows made for adults were episodic by nature. It's just how TV was because it was appointment television. You missed even one appointment and you may find yourself lost. I mean, that's why I didn't watch shows like Star Trek Deep Space Nine until years later on Netflix. I always wanted to watch the show, but often found myself lost if I missed any previous episodes. So for a Saturday morning kid show, that's a lot of faith that your audience has enough willpower to pull their carcasses out of bed every single week to catch your show. But again, it was also wise to keep those episodes relatively self-contained. While the people who remember being those very kids who watched it weekly don't really care much then or even now, the downside is that the majority of these episodes just aren't great and fail to land on even the basics of storytelling. I try really hard to be kind and to see this show through the proper lens, but damn what a difference a decade makes from the 80s to the 90s. See, I barely, if at all, remember the 80s, but I saw 90s kids TV from beginning to end, and somewhere in the middle, it got really good. I know some of those Disney afternoon shows don't hold up all that great, but I think that the major turning point was probably Batman the Animated Series. Suddenly, everyone needed to keep up, so X-Men and Spider-Man stood up to the challenge. Plus, Nickelodeon came out with Rugrats, Rocko's Modern Life, Doug, and so many more. So by the time Reboot came around in 1994, only 10 years after Transformers debuted, the game was changed visually as well. I mean, that was it. Transformers looked like a relic from the past. Yet, it has survived. It's survived a whole lot more than other properties around the same time, even from like the top tier. He-Man, She-Ra, Thundercats, Ghostbusters, they've all seen revivals of varying success, but nothing with the staying power of Transformers. Often there are years between remakes and reboots of these shows, but with Transformers there's always something in the works. When one show gets retired, a new one is already on its way. And while it's looked like a lot of different things over the years, if it weren't for the foundation of this season and the toys that accompanied it, it just wouldn't look like anything. Another factor in its success must be the characters. Season 1 had characters that are easily the most iconic and long-lasting in the franchise. Season 2 would see a huge influx of new Autobots and Decepticons, but there really is something special about the original crew. Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, Jazz, Wheeljack, Ironhide, Grimlock. Some of these are household names. And there are fewer Decepticons, but the big names are just as big. Megatron, Soundwave, and Starscream's popularity pretty much rivals that of Optimus. The characters are so strong and the designs so iconic that they really are the glue that keeps this whole show together. Some are, of course, more forgettable. I mean, find me someone whose favorite Autobot is Huffer. And who really cares about Reflector? I mean, he was basically just there to have some bodies for Autobots to shoot at, so... Did he have a character? I don't know. Well, some great characters did come out of Season 2, but not nearly as many would really win the hearts of the kids like the initial crew. Of course, we'll have to explore that as we get into those reviews. Keep in mind that when there was a G1 resurgence, first with the Dreamwave comics, who were the primary characters featured? Apart from the Aerial Bots and a few others, it was mostly Season 1 characters. When the 2007 movie came out, the entire Autobot crew were just Season 1 characters. Whether you like these adaptations or not, they knew which foundational characters would have the most draw and appeal to nostalgic adults. And it didn't take long for them to start bringing in more characters. Despite there being far more Autobots than Decepticons, they piled onto the Autobot team first, bringing in Skyfire, who was a necessary addition to help even the playing field once it was established that the Autobots couldn't fly after all. Now the Autobots could travel elsewhere in the world, and it makes a lot more sense than just, casually driving up to the Arctic. And bringing in the Dinobots was a stroke of genius, since it broke the mold saying that, hey, a Transformer doesn't have to be a vehicle. I mean, sure, kids like cars and kids like robots, but kids also like dinosaurs. It does perplex me though as to why we have to wait until the final 2 episodes of this season to get new Decepticons, especially when the gimmicks are great. The Insecticons are awesome in concept. Giant robot insects would be right up my alley as a kid, and actually I guess they were, since I grew up in the Beast Wars era. And having the Constructicons combine into an even bigger robot just seems like the next logical step in Transformers evolution. Not just because it makes kids need to buy more figures to complete that set, but also because it's a logical way to raise the stakes. These are all features that kids can really get into, and for the most part are implemented well for the show. I've voiced my concerns about the Insecticons already, but again, it does remain to be seen how much I get into them. By the end of the season, the cast has really filled out, and having new characters properly introduced would start to become a thing of the past from this point forward in the series. Characters would just start to appear, so this way of doing things would be missed. For all my criticisms of Season 1, the voice acting is never really the problem, apart from a weak read here and there, but that's bound to happen. Peter Cullen, almost 40 years later, is still the definitive voice for Optimus Prime. Even the great Gary Chalk, who played Optimus Primal in Beast Wars, when he stepped up to do Prime in Transformers Robots in Disguise and Armada, it just didn't feel like an ideal fit. I say Optimus Prime, you think of Peter Cullen, who brings a strength and kindness to the role right off the bat. And they weren't shy about getting outside the box choices for some characters like comedian Christopher Collins for Starscream, whose performance really brought out the Weasley nature of that character, and no doubt made him as memorable and iconic as he was. And don't forget Scatman Crothers, most famous for his role in The Shining. Made Jazz a memorable character by giving him an easygoing, smooth-talking playfulness. Of course, they brought in tons of skilled voice actors like Frank Welker and Casey Kasem, who would pile on plenty of characters since they have the versatility to do that. The point I'm trying to make is that voice acting, like any acting, is so important to the quality of the project. The writing can be amazing, but if the acting makes it sound inauthentic, it will not ring true for the audience. I mean, take a look at that slog that was the war for Cybertron. Whew, but that is a review for another day. And luckily for the most part, the dialogue of the show isn't too bad. The problems are the fundamentals in storytelling, but they seem to know the voices of the character pretty well. Often fairly cheesy, but very fun. Okay, sometimes the dialogue is really lame.
You and Starscream look real geeky.
I don't know if calling people geeky was some devastating insult back in the 80s, but nowadays it just sounds silly, especially coming from giant robots. All in all, it leaves me in a weird place, where I have to recommend Season 1 to people who have an interest in Transformers or older animation in general. Just with the caveat that you need to keep your expectations in check. People who grew up with the show remember it as this amazing turning point in this childhood, but newcomers may find themselves bewildered by the popularity of it. But you have to remember that this show was churned out at a really fast pace, and meeting deadlines took its toll on the stories and the animation regularly. So just like The Phantom Menace and U2's Pop, you just have to take it, warts and all. I don't quite love Season 1 of Transformers, but I appreciate it and love what it did bring us. The foundations of this altogether fairly short season of kids television still impacts pop culture to this day, so the merits of their work have been proven by time. So this concludes the first season of Back to Iacon. Season 1 was a very short season, especially compared to Season 2. I'd love to continue right away, but I actually need to focus on the upcoming show Beast Machines Monday to analyze that divisive sequel to Beast Wars. That show will be with Predacon Paul and off the cuff, just like Beast Wars Wednesday was, so expect that show to be more in line with that. Once I feel like continuing Back to Iacon won't burn me out, I will be diving back into G1. Regardless, if you like Transformers, be sure to subscribe and stick around, because just like Megatron, you better believe I'll be back.
I will be avenged.